Okay, okay, you'll do the, okay, can we, bring this session or a meeting to bear, so can we have the roll, please?
Certainly. Chair Guyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Liu.
Here.
Board Member Kim.
Here.
Board Member Firth.
Okay, do we have anything from staff as far as agenda changes, anything else?
No changes to speak of, and there's no one in the audience to speak under oral communications, I see.
Okay. As I said, yes, there's nobody in the audience, that's why I bypassed it. Okay, we have no minutes to approve, so let's go to the first item, and that would be discussion regarding the proposed reduction of number of ARB findings for approval.
So, yes, let me introduce that. I'll also mention that Assistant Director Jonathan Late is here. We've been, both of us, involved in this effort of taking a look at the Architectural Review Board findings, or I should say Architectural Review Approval findings, as part of a larger effort called the Omnibus that you'll be hearing about. So today, our goal is to discuss the possibility of reducing those from 16 to 5 findings. You have been seeing our staff reports that have consolidated, 2 or more findings into a category. And I think we've had some success with that. So the idea is to further collapse those into 5 if we can. The goal being to have a more efficient process for writing and reading staff reports to get closer to our goal of identifying substantive issues with projects, and of course referencing other criteria such as design, context-based design criteria, and other findings that you find in the urban design for downtown plan and El Camino Real design guidelines. Jonathan, would you like to mention anything?
Good morning. Thank you for, we wanted to have this opportunity to have it as a public hearing in case there were members of the community that were interested to speak, as opposed to the retreat, which is a little bit more informal, but I could see that we don't have a very packed audience here, and we weren't necessarily expecting it, but these,
There may be thousands of people watching.
I'm sure, I'm expecting that. But a big reason why we're bringing these findings forward is in response to some of the comments that I've heard since I've been here about the quality of the findings. I've heard it from the council level, I've heard it from community members. And when I started looking at this in a little bit more detail, there were just so many findings that need to be made for the projects. I could understand why some of the findings have been pretty standard or perfunctory and not developed to a significant degree, because there's a fair amount of fatigue that goes into writing 16 base findings plus 5 additional concept findings plus any DEEs or any other, it's a long report, and it's long for the public and it's long for board members to read through all of those things. It's hard to be critical for that length of time. So what we tried to do was, and what we found out is that some of the findings just weren't really relevant anymore, that we capture it in the plan check phase of our project review, or we don't need 3 findings to talk about landscaping. And the board, I think, recognized this in earlier conversations when we started grouping recently similar findings. So we just want to take it to the next step and see, do we need all of these findings here, or can we collapse them? And we've presented our proposal, and we would welcome the board's perspective on that, because I think if the board's recommendation, I think, is going to go a long way for the council in their comfort level and being able to endorse the proposed changes as well. So we're here to listen to your thoughts on that and make any changes that you think are important to modify.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how you want to do this. I can't imagine there are a lot of questions and comments at the same time, so you want to just take them both together?
Somebody may have a lot of.
Somebody may have a lot of questions. Okay.
Yeah, I got 6 pages.
You do? Okay, well then why don't we start with you then? But see, that's why the variation, you keep us abreast of the legal aspect of it.
First of all, great project. So glad you're doing this. Completely agree that we all get findings fatigue. I assume that the people who came before us are just as smart as we are, but times change. And I also assume that every time there's a problem, another condition gets added to the bottom of the list without integrating it with what's above, which leads to the present oversupply. I went through, but I'm concerned that in consolidating these, we may have lost some of the authority of the ARB, and I wouldn't want to do that absent-mindedly. I want that to be deliberate. And I like the way that you've, the first one's about compatibility with various things. The second one's about unified and coherent design within the project. The third one's about, we want a good project, high-quality materials. Fourth one's more about function, and the fifth one's about landscape. And I think those are good conceptual organizing principles. The strong thing about the early original findings is they're short declarative sentences. And I think those are easier for us to follow and for the public to follow, and they focus what you're doing. When I was looking at them, I sort of coded them to what they were about. I started out the same way you did, compatibility, internal design. And then there's some kind of landscaping, materials and colors, what we might call green building code things, and enhancing the desirability of living conditions, which keeps popping up. If the comprehensive plan was perfect, you'd only need one finding. It's it's compatible with the general plan, and that would have all the guidance we needed. But it isn't, and isn't really designed to be. What I was concerned that when you're looking at these things, particularly when a court's reviewing it, you want as many concrete nouns as possible. When you say something like suitable, you can feel that you're in rather spongy territory. So I wanted to suggest that you put back in some of the really specific words about what we're reviewing. Which is, you define the scope in two ways. One is subject matter, one is standards. And the subject matter is very broad. I mean, we get to say, you have insufficient details. We get to say those materials aren't suitable. And I think it's important to keep those concrete nouns in there. I also would like to keep the specific finding about pedestrian and bicycle and transit access to sites. We're seeing projects, I mean, including really big ones, where it's clearly an afterthought. I mean, it's all about driveways for cars into the site. And there's no separate access for bikes. There's nothing to encourage bikes. There's no visible bicycle parking. And I think that, from my point of view, that's something I'd like us to really be focused on, something I'd like applicants to be focused on, so that when you see a site, you think, oh yeah, they thought about this, this encourages that, or you just think, gee, that'd be a fun place to bicycle to, or oh, I could bicycle to that. I'm also interested in abandoning essentially the green code findings, green building code findings that this commission, I gather, pioneered for the city. And a lot of them have been replaced by the green building codes, which, needless to say, I am not as familiar with as my colleagues, but I did read the checklist in the city's ordinance. And that was one of the things that led me to think about bicycle access, because I don't see any little box about that. I also really like having the provisions about avoiding heat islands and on-site drainage, because those are broader powers than I saw in the green building code, and I think they're important. And when we've raised the issue with applicants, they've improved their projects in that regard. I don't know what it means to say natural features are appropriately preserved and integrated. I mean, maybe that means you set back from a creek, or you have big rocks. I mean, the biggest natural feature around here is the sky. Maybe that means you keep views to the sky. I would like a specific reference to thinking about views and effects on views from the public right-of-way. I also, and I don't know if this is possible, but I wish that we had, is there a way to specifically deal with the issue of how are projects dealing with anticipated climate change impacts during the life of the building? I mean, it kind of shocked me that that beautiful glass structure that we looked at the other day, the big site, the 13-acre site, when I asked the architect, how many degrees of climate change is this designed to deal with, the answer was, I don't know. And that does seem to be inconsistent with the city's general approach that this is serious, this is real, this should be addressed. But perhaps it's already covered in other codes. So I have a bunch of notes here, which I'm happy to give you. Oh, and then I have a bias against the word utilize instead of use. You're welcome to it, I've got it. Sorry, here's the other page. So I think it's a great project, but I am concerned about losing some discretionary power that we now have.
Alex?
So, I think, so we generally support the sort of integration of the 16 findings, because I would agree they've been too wordy in the past. In reading the condensed 5 findings, I sort of had a somewhat similar view is that I was thinking that it's getting too simple, too simplified. In a way, you're referencing the comp plan, which is good, right? Because because the comp plans can change over time. So I think that makes sense. But at the same time, I think just in looking at pros and cons, like if we know the comp plan, and we reference it, and I look at it, every other week, that's one thing. But then from the public's point of view, if they don't have a comp plan sitting on their shelf, right, then they don't necessarily have anything to reference. I mean, the way it's worded now is that it's sort of, if I'm just reading the findings and not reading the comp plan, it gives me sort of a perspective of what the board can look at and what it really shouldn't be looking at, right? I mean, it gives a little framework for it. So, so that's the pros and cons to me of that. It seems like the one on past projects where people want to oppose a project, it's regarding some issues that I don't think the findings cover that well, which is on-street parking, right? And I understand like there's some CEQA issues, right, that maybe on-street parking isn't a environmental impact, and so, but we don't ever. It's never really. I don't think it's actually ever said anywhere in our own documents. So they do that. They argue that our parking ratio is insufficient, so therefore the project is not functional. And so I guess that to me is probably a zoning code issue. I mean, that's a parking ratio thing with the zoning ordinance. I don't think that's necessarily at the board's discretion about that. And then also they've also mentioned like the fee in lieu parking for things downtown, and that's a whole other thing into itself. I think the other issue that I think that's come up on some projects is what is the context? What is the surrounding context? So sometimes they'll argue, well, the immediate buildings right next door to the left and the right, or one story, therefore this new project needs to be 1 story or 2 stories, right? But if you look at that whole block, there might be 4-story buildings or more. And so the definition of context is a little vague, and I think that maybe that's probably the right way of doing it, because we have so many different projects. I mean, it's hard to be specific about all of it, but I would just say that the range of what people interpret of the context varies in this town. There's some words that have disappeared between the current findings and the proposed findings. So let's see, say like on number 11, natural features are, this is an existing number 11, natural features are appropriately preserved and integrated with the project. And if I take that over into the new findings, it disappears, right? It's just saying it's integrated. And I think that some people feel pretty strongly about preservation of existing buildings and of trees, right? Some more than others, but I mean, so I think that that word that could be an issue with some people. And I think, and then I wanted to follow up on some of Wynn's points. So I think you were critical of like the large sites and like the pedestrian, the multimodal access for that. And I would just point out that to me, that's a weakness. To me, just on some past projects, the board has been weaker on those big projects. But I would say that in the context-based findings, there is, if you go farther back in the document, there is a special section for large, like multi-acre sites. So this would be 7, yeah, item number 7. I guess it's like, yeah. So there is a provision on the, so it would be 7, it's on the last page, right? Below figure 8.1, it says C, designed for easy pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access. So we could, and there's also the heat island effects there too. So there's a lot of stuff back there. And I don't think that we really, I hate to generalize, but I'm not sure that we always reference that last part of the context-based criteria. I mean, large projects are usually, there's so much public testimony, and then we're hashing out really big issues, and I don't know if we always get to that. Sometimes we do. And we definitely have more smaller projects than larger projects. But I just say there is stuff there. It's not, we're not losing all of it. I think staff is trying to say that we have it covered, right, in the existing zoning. Yeah.
I would comment that maybe having it as number 8, it does get buried after so many pictures. It might be nice to bump it up earlier in the list, because it's not applicable to large projects only, and it comes after large projects. So, you know.
And also, I would just say just generally that the context-based findings are just the way they're formatted. It's sort of a lot, and then it's in multiple places in the code. And so you're not always, like when I'm looking through it, it's like, is this one different for the downtown district than for another zoning district? And it just sort of gets, in my mind, it gets lost. I'm familiar with all the general concepts, but it gets a little fuzzy. So, and I think the criticism that I get on projects is that the bigger projects are the ones that need the most amount of attention. And so I think to your point, Amy, like putting it first would make sense in the scheme of things. People want the large projects sort of addressed more so than our nitpicky things about colors and materials on smaller infill projects. So, okay, so I think I will pass the baton for now.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add with all that's been said, but I think it's good that we have board member Firth, because I think I initially, after my own review and coming in this morning, I was generally okay with the proposed findings, and I thought, probably being one of the least, civically involved, or the least civically tenured person, I don't know how you want to put that, but having the least experience kind of on a city level with these kinds of things, I preferred to keep it simple almost, and I was actually pretty happy with the new findings, but after listening to board member Firth's comments, I can see how it is kind of taking away a little bit of clarity and even kind of the authority that the ARB has, and not to keep, not to be authoritarian by any means, but to make sure that we're consistent with kind of clear findings. So I know that we're not necessarily approving this today, and I know it's a discussion, so I think this is good. I was actually I was curious to hear what the other board members would think about maybe adding back a sixth finding that would kind of be an inclusive green building finding, because I know that it's covered in the updated green building ordinance and code, but I think to kind of re-emphasize that would be important, because I don't think we want to make it seem like, oh, well, it's covered, so we're just going to kind of ignore it. And I know that's not necessarily the case either, because it is kind of covered in the context-based criteria. But I think that was kind of my interpretation of things. And again, I think we're going in the right direction. I don't know how we can be a little bit more clear and kind of keep some of the things that we need to keep. But I guess that's why we're here and talking about it.
Thank you. I agree, but looking at these, it's almost sort of a double-edged sword. In some cases, if you keep things a little bit more vague, it actually gives, in my opinion, it gives you more flexibility to be able to, I mean, if you say, shall comply with the neighborhood or whatever, that's a very broad sentence as compared to it, she'll be the same height as every other building in the neighborhood, or whatever the case is, something like that. So actually, my initial thought is actually combining items 2 and 3, because I don't think they vary that much, and I think it can go into a larger, just a number 2 or whatever, because the one item basically mainly deals with the materials and that sort of thing, and I don't think that's, again, that big a criteria that it can't be absorbed into number 3. I do agree that in some cases, some of the specific language has been lost in the items, and just like what's been mentioned before, the idea about the approximate or appropriately preserved, that sort of thing, and the language has been shortened too much. I think some of that can be brought back, but I like the idea of keeping it somewhat of a gray area, then that we have more flexibility to actually, because in the past, and I've seen other things being on both sides of it, where if you get this very specific list of 15 items, and they come back and say, hey, we covered those 15 items, so you can't say much, and all of a sudden, something was left out, or whatever the case is. If things are a little bit more vague, then you can get into more of the context or whatever, and be a little bit more, make it work with the particular item rather than being too specific. So I mean, that's why I said it's a catch-22 basically. Other than that, I mean, I'm definitely, I think this is going in the right direction, because sometimes, my goodness, these findings are 15 pages. There's a 1 or 2 page item for the, and then there's 15 pages worth of attachments. And if somebody sees this, it's like, my God, talk about the city just, browbeating somebody. Okay, anybody else? Any other comments, second thoughts? Yes.
I forgot one. In the existing, you deleted the section that referenced the purpose of architectural review on the belief that we already had that stuff. And there's one provision in there that I think it would be important to retain, which is about the project enhancing or something or other the quality of residential life. That's my idea of an important catch-all safety net provision, because you have
I agree, that's definitely that sort of a phrase.
What might happen when a particular project's proposed in a particular place. And that's probably, failure to deal with that's probably the thing that we catch the most flack for, where people feel most let down by us. And I think that should go back in, partly because there's always a certain uncertainty about what does is a purpose finding a separate finding, and I think it should be clearly a finding, and therefore I'd put it back in. I also must say that I'm just barely beginning to understand when we do and don't use context-based findings. Do we always use them?
They're not applicable in every chapter, but I believe all the projects that you would see, it is applicable. So, downtown, Cal Ave, El Camino,
Well, that's helpful.
It's pretty much, yeah, the commercial zones. And then we do have, it is applicable to multifamily residential. Sometimes you might see, three homes, and it would not be applicable in that case. We'll let you know.
I was just thinking about to the extent they backstop what we're doing. It sounds like they most always do.
Okay, anything else from anyone? Will that do it for you?
Yeah, if I can just offer a couple of comments on what we've heard and then maybe make a suggestion for how we go forward. So thank you for taking the time to carefully look over the changes. I appreciate that, and it's principally the reason why we're here, is to make sure that we're not leaving off something that is important to the board and to the community. Just a couple of random, as I look at my notes, comments. Nothing about this is intended to in any way reduce or minimize the board's authority. In fact, it is intended to be the opposite, as the chair had mentioned. We are trying to give the board, through the language that we're proposing, maximum discretion to impose conditions or require project modifications by the references that we are using. But I can appreciate the flip side of that argument. When there isn't some specificity, there might be a concern that there's not enough guidance to direct those comments. And as a corollary to this exercise, it's only briefly mentioned in the staff report. What I want to do also is take a look at our application materials and make sure that we're getting, that our application is a contemporary application, that we're asking for the kinds of information that the board needs and the public needs to have a thoughtful review of a project, and ask the applicant, in many cases, to demonstrate how they think they're complying with the findings or how they are meeting the green building standards, and to provide and to require more of a photo montage or perspective rendering of the proposed building in context to the adjacent buildings. So there's another layer of this that I'm hoping that we can roll out that would sync well with the proposed modifications to give the board and the community a clearer picture of what's being proposed. And it may actually even trigger more conversation about some of the things that are a little bit less specific in the proposed findings. I appreciate the comment about the existing finding number 11 about appropriately preserved the natural features. We'll make sure, we'll definitely include that. And the board member Firth appropriately noted sort of the construct that we approach this with, the idea of compatibility and design as distinct items, also distinct from the materials, which is further distinct from the functionality of the project. And it's through that functionality that we intended, and I think perhaps too broadly, to address the pedestrian access and the bikes. And so I'd like to take a chance to highlight that more in that finding and be more specific. I also appreciate the comment about the green building finding and reintroducing that, or having that stay part of it, because I think we can use that and capture some of the other comments that were made about heat island effect and the standards. So let's look at adding a sixth finding that would capture the green building and some of the comments that I see written here from board member Firth. Also the comment about quality of life, and I think I would like to pull back and just make a comment about quality of life, that the project is enhancing the quality of life or the quality of the experience of this area or neighborhood, because it may be residential, but it may also be the business owners or the property owners in that area. So I don't want to be specific necessarily about residential, which clearly the board would consider, because it would be all elements or all segments of society. Regarding the comment of views, the comprehensive plan already does include some considerations of view sheds, which is something that we look at when we're evaluating a project. So I think the first finding about compatibility addresses that. Climate change is a broader conversation that the community is engaging with the water district, and there are efforts underway. I don't know how we would have any kind of in light of the data and the science that exists today, how we would apply certain construction elements to climate change for projects. I'm kind of struggling to see how staff might evaluate that as a finding, but I appreciate that that's an important issue that we need to be thoughtful about, but it might be at a higher, broader level. The comments about the off-street parking and parking ratios and the downtown parking, clearly these are hot button issues with the community, and the council's been taking a look at that and pulling back some of the exemptions that exist in the code. I would agree that these are zoning code issues, these are policy issues, and I wouldn't want the findings to start making policy. What I want the findings to do is make sure that it's reflecting the policy and responding to the policy that's set by the city council. So if our parking standards are what they are, then I think if we have a problem with that, we need to look at it at that level as opposed to making some tweaks to the findings at this stage. When we were looking at this in the context-based findings, that's sort of the next chapter that I want to tackle, because I believe it's confusing to track it, and I think we should look at consolidating the context-based findings and pulling out where specific geographic areas need to be highlighted. But I think if we consolidated it into one chapter with a reference, that would be something I'd like to pursue for our next round in our 2016 effort to make some changes to the code, because I think that could help improve the order of that. And
let me interject one thing that I forgot about, and I want to agree with the whole green building standards in that, and I've had it happen on a personal basis where if we don't stress it here, I've seen the situation where the project goes along to building, and then building says, well, you need to comply with this, 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 and this, and they end up changing the design, and the fellow in building goes, yeah, great, they complied with that. Then when the thing gets built, it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't look at all like we were told. And it could be, it could be a relatively subtle change, but it could also make a big difference. A subtle design change can make a big difference in the overall. So, I mean, I'd like to see, there are things that the green building requirements do to the design of the building, and I think those need to be addressed at our level.
Fantastic, and we certainly would agree with that. The one last comment I have is on the reference to the purpose section, and the reason for striking that was to the extent possible, I'd like to minimize the reference to other sections of the code that require a member of the public or board members or staff to go back and look through something to go find, okay, well, what is subsection A about? But I heard the comment about quality of life as being a key component of that, and I think we can embed that into the findings without the reference to the subsection A. So if what I had said makes sense, then what I'd like to do is come back at your next meeting with a revised version of this as it goes on to the PTC and then on to the City Council. There'll still be more opportunities for the public to participate in those changes, consideration of those changes. And if the board doesn't feel comfortable, if that moves too quickly.
I'm assuming everybody's okay with that?
To see it again?
It might be a consent calendar since we have so many items on the 17th.
Okay. And so, or maybe we put it at the end. In any event, we'll figure out the agenda management.
Well, yeah, I'll let you guys figure out
Yeah.
the when, but
So if that's the path that makes sense to the board, we'll proceed along those lines?
Yeah, that sounds good. Can I just add one comment? I didn't mean to say green building. I don't think it should be called green building, actually. I'd much rather it be called sustainable design or sustainable building.
again, that goes back to the whole
Right.
more of a gray, a fully encompassing statement.
And I think also part of it is that a lot of the public is kind of confused. If they think green building, they think, it's just landscaping, or they don't really understand. And I think it's part of our duty to kind of explain to them and make sure that they understand what sustainable building is all about. So thank you.
I had a question. I was looking at Santa Monica's findings, just because our lawyer used to work in Santa Monica, and they're an interesting city. And one of the things they talked about was sign design being integrated from the very beginning. And I've not been here long, but we've had 2 cases where it appears that didn't happen. And I don't know if that if that is a problem that we could address, and if so, where you'd want to address it.
So just so you know, I did work in Santa Monica for 8.5 years and actually was overseeing the
You wrote
architectural
those design
review board.
guidelines, did you?
That is always a frustration when a new building is coming before a board or commission, and you know they're going to be coming back and several months later with a sign, and you want to make sure there's a thoughtful consideration of where that placement's going to be. So yeah, I think that we can take a look at that. If it doesn't fit neatly in these findings, I know that we can capture it in our application requirements, but and also in our staff report. We can. The other thing I was going to mention was that we want to make some changes to our staff report template, so that we can identify these things that the board comes up with when you're reviewing a project and you think, okay, hey, this is a topic that we need to look at, sign integration. We can add that into our template pretty quickly, much more quickly than changing the code. And now it's something that we can see, and you can have a staff response to those issues. So let's take that comment and see if we can get it into the findings. If not, we'll see if we can capture it into the ARB or the ARB staff report.
So that's going to be like renaming Mount McKinley. You can do it by executive action.
Well, that's, yeah, yes, we can.
I might add to that, just because I've been doing this for a while here too, that we generally try to, when there's a new building coming along, say, okay, we know that you don't know who your tenants are yet, but show in dashed lines on your building elevations where those signs are going to be. So we have some repeat customers that I harp on for this, but we don't always get what we ask for, but we ask, and we want that to be part of the drawings.
Is that it?
Thank you for your time, appreciate it.
No problem, thank you. So basically then we're going to temporarily adjourn and go into the other conference room? Okay?